I'm the candidate of the Workers' Party for the Putney constituency. And I wanted to explain what my views are, how I view the last 5 years. I also tried to assess the dynamics that happen at Speaker's Corner. I'm a veteran at Speaker's Corner. I've been speaking here since December 1986. So quite a long time I've been up here. 39 years, nearly 39 years.
40th anniversary next year.
40th anniversary will be next December. So it was very late in December. Or maybe beginning of December actually. It was the very first time. Then I came back in January or so for a couple of times. And I was away in France and then I came back regularly after that. Some people have come to Speaker's Corner today from different groups. And I think they assumed, because I was walking around in Putney with the Palestinian flag over the last days, tying it into the campaign that we're running. We are running a campaign primarily on the basis that you should not vote for parties that are complicit in supporting genocide against the Palestinian people. So it's a sort of fundamental dividing line between what is acceptable and not acceptable. And at the hustings this week between Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak, they barely mentioned the question of Gaza. Both of them, of course, are backing. In fact, if not in word, the actions of Israel in killing up to 40,000 civilians in Palestine, in Gaza. About 70% of those who have been killed have been women and children. We've got the Ukrainians as well, look at that. Slava Ukraine. I feel, well, all right, I'll get on to Ukraine. Because I talk about Ukraine as well. I know most people in Britain have a lot of sympathy with the Ukrainians. And that's understandable. Look, you've got a fair turnout today for the Ukrainians. But I put it to you this. We have no business in Ukraine. Britain has no business in Ukraine.
Why?
We are sending weapons and finance. By the way, our ministers and officials are telling the Russians that they have the right to fire our missiles into Russia. Are telling the Ukrainians to fire our missiles into Russia to escalate the war. The other thing the British are doing is they are lobbying to seize control of Russian assets and to use Russian assets as a mechanism of financing the arming of Ukraine. And of course, as these people should know, most of them of course are women, but as these people should know, Britain, Europe and America are prepared to fight in Ukraine to the last Ukrainian man. That's the reality of the war in Ukraine. It is not a war in the interest of Ukrainians, it's not a war in the interest of the Russians, and it's not a war in the interest of the Western world.
Why?
Because what is the purpose of the war?
The purpose of the war is to protect the sovereignty of countries. Ukraine was invaded by Russia. We are supporting Ukraine.
I mean, you say Ukraine was invaded by Russia.
Yes.
The fact of the matter is, in 1990, I lived in East Germany. When the Berlin Wall fell, the Cold War order came to an end. I remember the discussions daily on television. Mikhail Gorbachev, Francois Mitterrand, Margaret Thatcher, and Ronald Reagan or George Bush then. And the discussion was quite simple. There will be no NATO expansion east of the Oder-Neisse frontier, Oder-Neisse River. That was the agreement upon which the Soviet Union withdrew troops from Eastern Europe. That was the agreement. That was the deal. And all Russians understood that. And then, because Russia was weakened, its economy collapsed, Western powers went in and seized control of the assets by financing gangsters to take control of the whole of Russia, with many of whom were then given asylum or resources in Britain or elsewhere in the Western world. For example, Chelsea Football Club. For example, the Metro newspaper. For example, I think it's the Daily Telegraph. For example, the Evening Standard. Handed over to Russian oligarchs by the British, and they, by the way, they talk a lot about boats coming from abroad. They gave them free passage to come to England, provided they pay enough money to the Tories or to the Labour Party leadership. They were given asylum here, given permission to take over businesses here, to become billionaires here, to wash their criminal money in England, America and Europe. And then they turned round, marching up day by day, ever further towards the east. They turned round on the borders of Russia, right next to Moscow. They turned round and organised a coup d'etat in 2014 called the Maidan events. In that coup d'etat, a democratically elected pro-Russian president Yanukovych's name was removed from office by the Americans and the Europeans with their direct support, financing and supporting Nazi forces inside Ukraine to overthrow the government of Ukraine. Then when a pro-Western government was in power, suddenly everything was fine. And now only a few days ago, just before the British Parliament was dissolved, Boris Johnson was meeting with members of the neo-Nazi Azov battalion inside the British Parliament. Inside the British Parliament. And by the way, Boris Johnson was responsible for scuppering a peace deal that Zelensky was prepared to make with the Russians. So when these people are marching around London, I understand why they're marching, but they're deluded in thinking that the British and Americans and Europeans are standing up for the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians are so many pawns in a global game of power. And if you want to see how they are pawns, ask yourself this. How many times have they told them we'll be winning the war in a month or 2 months or 3 months? In fact, the war in Ukraine has become similar to the First World War, but with modern weapons, with drones, with laser-guided missiles, with special technologies like robo soldiers. But the people themselves, the ordinary soldiers, are sitting in trenches facing this war. There is no benefit to the Ukrainians in this war. There is no benefit to the Europeans in this war. And all of you, you think it's some external thing, it's not external. Your gas bills, your electricity, your food prices, your commodity prices have all been raised to astronomical levels as a result of the madness of this war in Ukraine.
No, I think that's the excuse. Why
yes, that's the excuse. It's not the only. It's not only the excuse. That is one of the excuses. Because, of course, you see, having plundered the world during coronavirus by shutting down the world, claiming you're going to die of a deadly virus, and then seizing control of the world through technology and big pharma, then we had a shift in the balance of power. The pharma was out. Tech was minimized, but not out completely. And the military came back. The military-industrial complex that has been one of the longest-standing threats to our fundamental rights throughout the history of the last 150 years. That military-industrial complex linked to tech are the people who seized control when the Ukraine war started. And you may remember, if you look back at the chronology of events in 2022, they were about to introduce compulsory mandates for all NHS staff to be vaccinated with the Pfizer juice. And then what happened? Suddenly, from one day to the next, one little law was changed, or one regulation was changed. Before we were allowed to travel, free of tests or vaccines, before we were allowed to travel, suddenly there was a clause on the website of the Foreign Office and the website of the COVID information from the government. And it stated, people from Ukraine can come to England without a vaccination and without a test. The next 3 or 4 days later, all COVID regulations were removed. We were told COVID is finished. COVID is over. But the war has begun. So they moved from one type of fear porn to the next type of fear porn. And now you see where it's going. You know, they talk about the Muslims in Xinjiang, how oppressed they are, how the British government and the Americans and the Europeans cry tears over the fate of the Muslims in Xinjiang in China. And yet, when the bombs started raining down on women and children by the thousands, nearly 100,000 injured or killed in Gaza in a few months, a people who are defenseless or nearly defenseless. They have no army, they have no navy, they're in an open prison, as surely as the Jews were in a prison in Auschwitz or in Buchenwald. And yet, when you go on the streets with a flag, they say you're in hate. I went on the street the other day to campaign for the general election for my candidacy in Putney. And a policeman ran up to me, flashed his card at me and said, "Who gave you permission to hold that flag up? Who gave you permission to stand here on the street?" I said, "I'm standing in the general election. I have the right to stand here." And only when I pulled out my camera and turned it on him did he run away with his tail between his legs. We live in a country. I remember during the lockdowns, I came here to protect free speech. By the way, the free speech of all those I disagree with. That's what I wanted to protect. I'm not here just to give my own point of view. I'm here to protect our right to exchange ideas, to discuss, debate, argue. And any idiot, whether they call themselves left-wing, whether they call themselves fundamentalist Christian, or fundamentalist religious, or fundamentalist right-wing, or fundamentalist, I don't care. If you're here to break up free speech at Speaker's Corner, I am against you. I am against you. And I say that as a Marxist who's been speaking at Speaker's Corner since 1985. Just a quick commercial interlude. These are my leaflets for my election campaign. I want you to support me in this election campaign, physically, materially, and ideologically. Put out the message to other people. Come and help me out during the campaign.
Can I just ask you, what do you know about the Nazis in West Ukraine? Why the mainstream media never tell us about it?
The Nazis in Western Ukraine, if you look on the Guardian newspaper, the Independent newspaper, and you type in before 2020, 2021 as the date parameters, you will find the British government, the British establishment, all knew that the Azov battalion are neo-Nazis. All of them. They hold the signs, insignia and support. They do the Nazi salute. They eulogize Bandera and they cheer on Adolf Hitler. And yet the British government have been throwing their weight and support. Remember when Mariupol was being besieged, they said the Azov heroes in the Mariupol steelworks. Who are they? A neo-Nazi gang, financed and supported by the West. That's the reality. Now, as I said, I have sympathy with the ordinary Ukrainians suffering as a consequence of the barbarity carried out by the policies or the result of the policies of the Western world. As, by the way, I have sympathy with the Israelis who are killed on October the 7th. Of course I do. But you know, even the most fervent religious Christian or fervent religious Jew, they know the phrase, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. We had 4 people released yesterday, I understand, and 200 killed. In other words, 1 eye for 50 eyes. 1 eye for 50 eyes. I had an Israeli IDF guy I discussed with last week or the week before, and he turned around and said, you know, in international conflict, 1 to 3 or 1 to 4 is a normal ratio between civilians and military. But in Israel or in Gaza, what is happening today is the slaughter of the innocent. The slaughter of the innocent. In the name of what? In the name of defense of Israel. I listened carefully this morning to Keir Starmer's statement on food and water. Yes, they have the right, he said, to cut off food and water. I listened carefully. I went over again the statement of Rishi Sunak. We stand, he said, we stand forever behind Israel. That's the argument they made. Israel was a British creation. The Balfour Declaration to plant Israel as a seed to control the whole of the oil supply and the gas and energy resources of the Middle East, to control the governments in the region, to overthrow governments, to create secret services that are involved in conspiracies all around the world. And that, by the way, remember in Britain, this man's brother was the leader of the Labour Party between 2015 and 2019. Anybody and everybody who studied what happened during that period will know that it was the Israel lobby in Britain and internationally who directly subverted Jeremy Corbyn's leadership of the Labour Party and intervened as a foreign power inside British politics to remove the leader of the opposition party. That is a simple fact. There's another program produced by Al Jazeera called The Lobby in America. It shows the power of the Israel lobby in the United States, determining the policies of the Democrats and the Republicans. Donald Trump says he will change policy in relation to Ukraine, but he has never said he will change policy in relation to Israel. He will give more bombs, more weapons, more support to the Israeli murderers and butchers carrying out barbarity. And I was surprised when we went on the street last week in Putney at the number of people coming up and giving us support the moment you had a Palestinian flag up. Hundreds and hundreds of people came up over a period of a few hours to offer their support, to agree with us. That in Putney, what is, with a small c, a conservative area of Britain. So they will be in for a big surprise on July the 4th, because there will be a wave of people whose main question in the election is not, is Keir Starmer going to cost you £2,000 in taxes? Not, are we going to have national service? Not, are we going to send people to Rwanda? But are we going to change our internal political system such that we do not carry out barbarism and genocide in the name of the British people with your taxpayers' money, with your work, with your energy, going towards financing and supporting barbarians, crooks and gangsters who locked us up under the COVID story, who duped us and robbed us in the name of Ukraine, and who are now supporting the worst act of barbarism in 50 years of European history. That's the reality, or more than 50 years of European history. That is what the dividing line is going to be in this election. And by the way, now they're scared that there'll be a low turnout. But I tell you this, those people who are voting about Gaza will be determined to turn out and vote. So they should beware. They will get the shock of their life on July the 4th, when dozens or possibly more than dozens, possibly up to 100 people could be elected on the basis of what happened in Gaza. So I ask you for your support during this election campaign. Give me your name, give me your email, give me your support, give me your money to help the campaign to remove these barbarians who control our society from power. Thanks very much, ladies and gentlemen.